When you're looking at a high-end mobile workstation, the biggest question is always whether the price tag translates into real-world productivity or just a collection of impressive numbers on a spec sheet. I've spent the last few weeks testing the HP ZBook 8 G1i on a mix of on-site client meetings, a home editing suite, and a couple of long-haul flights, and I want to break down exactly what that experience feels like. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the ZBook 8 isn't trying to be a fine and light ultrabook. At 4.2 pounds and a 14-inch chassis, it sits squarely in the portable workstation lane. That size is a sweet spot for people who need a full-sized keyboard and a screen you can actually see detail on without squinting, yet still want to toss it into a backpack for a site visit. The 1920x1200 display gives a little extra vertical real estate compared to a standard 1080p panel, which becomes noticeable when you're scrolling through long spreadsheets or aligning layers in Photoshop. In daylight, the matte coating holds up better than you'd expect for a workstation. You won't be fighting glare on a conference room table, but you'll still notice a slight washout if you step outside on a sunny day. That's a trade-off you'll have to accept unless you pair it with a portable shade or an external monitor. The heart of the machine is the Intel Core Ultra 7255H, a 12-core CPU that leans heavily into AI-accelerated workloads. In practice, that means the laptop handles things like real-time denoising in DaVinci Resolve and IBIST upscaling in Lightroom a bit more fluidly than a comparable mainstream laptop. When I opened a 30-minute 4K video project, the rendering preview stayed buttery smooth, and the background export finished about 12% faster than on my older workstation with a similar GPU. The Arc 140T GPU isn't a desktop-grade RTX, but it does support hardware-accelerated ray tracing and offers enough CUDA-compatible cores for most CAD and 3D modeling tasks. I ran a couple of SolidWorks assemblies with complex textures, and while the frame rate dipped when I rotated the model quickly, the experience remained usable. No stutter that would force me to switch to a desktop. Memory and storage are where the ZBook 8 starts to feel more like a workstation than a consumer laptop. The 32GB of DDR4 RAM is soldered in, so you won't be upgrading later, but it's more than enough for multitasking between a heavy IDE, a browser full of tabs, and a background render. The 1TB NVMe SSD is fast enough that the OS boots in under 10 seconds, and large project files copy across the drive in a blink. I noticed a practical benefit when I used the laptop as a portable file server on a job site. Moving a 6GB project folder onto the internal SSD from a USB-C external drive took roughly 45 seconds, which saved a lot of time compared to older SATA-based workstations I've used. Now, who should actually consider buying this machine? If you're a freelance architect, a video editor who moves between client locations, or an engineer who needs to run simulations on the road, the ZBook 8 gives you a solid blend of compute power, a decent GPU, and a screen that's big enough to avoid eye strain during long sessions. The integrated AI features of the Core Ultra line are also a bonus if you use software that can tap into those accelerations. Think of Adobe's AI tools or any modern data science notebooks that leverage Intel's One API. The workstation also ships with Windows 11 Pro, which adds BitLocker encryption and remote management capabilities that corporate IT departments appreciate. On the flip side, if your workflow is dominated by pure gaming, you'll quickly find the Arc 140T lagging behind a dedicated RTX 3060 or higher. Likewise, if you're a developer who relies on Linux, the pre-installed Windows 11 Pro means you'll have to go through a dual boot setup or replace the OS entirely, which can be a hassle on a device where the firmware is tightly locked to HP's ecosystem. The soldered RAM also means you can't future-proof the machine if you anticipate needing 64 GB down the line. Finally, the price point sits above many consumer laptops with similar screen sizes, so if you don't need the certified ISV drivers that come with the ZBook line, you might get more bang for your buck with a high-end consumer laptop and add an external GPU later. A hidden trade-off that shows up after a week or two is the thermal behavior under sustained load. The ZBook 8 uses a thin chassis cooling solution that keeps the fan noise reasonable in most office settings, But when you push the CPU and GPU together for an hour straight, say, while rendering a full 4K export, the fan ramps up and can become audible enough to be noticeable in a quiet meeting room. The laptop does manage to keep temperatures within safe limits, but the sustained performance does throttle a few percent after the 30-minute mark. For most users, this isn't a deal breaker, it's just something to be aware of if you often run long, compute-heavy sessions without a cooling pad. Battery life is another practical point.